Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And it's been a bit. The weather has been real bad these last few months, so I've just been very sporadically doing videos. Also, I've just not been feeling the motivation. I don't know. We'll see where this channel goes in the future. I don't know if I'm going to continue doing BookTube or not. It's just kind of been a kind of like up and down as to whether or not I want to continue. But for today, since you're watching the video, obviously I have decided to continue in some form or another. We will see how long this goes in the future. But for today, I'm going to record a video, and I thought I would do a good video all about the wrap-up for all the books I read in the month of June. June was a very fun month. I was doing a Patreon reading event with Kitty and Kelsey. You should follow both of them and give them all your money. Even if you gotta stop giving me money, you should. Don't give me money, give them money. Now. Give all money. Or else. I'm robbing you on behalf of someone else. I'm Robin Hood in this. Anyways, there was a number of prompts that we all collectively made together in a big prompt sandwich. And I didn't really follow many of them because I am good at creating prompts, but I very rarely follow them. But I started the month off with a fun reading vlog idea, which is probably the best video I've made in a while, as far as like actually enjoying making videos again, and I think was kind of a little bit of an inspired thing, was doing a reading vlog based on a roll of the dice. I rolled a d20 and read whatever it kind of gave me. So starting out, I ended up with 2 books to start the month off. The Wilds by Richard Lehman, which was my physical read, and oh Richie, don't change. Well, you can't. You're dead now. But yeah, it was a Richard Lehman book. Let's just say that. It's about this guy who goes hiking and he's peeping and creeping on all these people. It's a very weird book. Like, I kind of enjoyed reading it because every few minutes I was just like, huh? It's short. It's a very short book. But every few minutes I just kept being like, what are you doing with this book, Richie? What you thinking? Why you make this choice? So it's fun to read in the idea that weird things just keep happening and you're like, why? But where? So it was at least entertaining to read from that point of view, but it was a very bad book and I did not enjoy it. A book on the complete opposite end of the spectrum was Jeff Strand's Dweller, which is actually a book recommended to me by one of my patrons. And this book blew me away. It is one of the best books I've ever read. I absolutely adored this book. It's one of those things where I had the alluded 6 stars, which was you enjoy a book so much it's above 5 stars, which then, of course, you'd be like, well, does that not mean that everything else should be 4 stars and this should only be 5 stars? And I'm like, whatevs. It's just a saying, and the rating systems are arbitrary. Anyways, Dweller by Jeff Strand. So it's basically the story about this kid who finds a cryptid in the woods and befriends him, but the cryptid is very dangerous, but so is the boy. And you really think that this is going to be a very kind of like a evil kid, kills things and like feeds them to this monster, or he gets the monster to take revenge on him. And like there are elements of that come into play, but the thing is, this book goes through all of his life. So Toby is the main kid's name, and he's got some very real problems. And there are spurts and potential happinesses in his life that are completely ruined by his relationship with this creature. And it's so heartbreaking because there are points when it's like both of them, both the creature and Toby, have the chance to become happy, to grow apart, but become more complete in the process. And they don't do it. And there is a number of very harrowing, horrifying situations that happen, but they happen so sporadically. When they happen, they really hit. Like, the emotional importance of the events hit so hard because they are so sporadic. And for the most part, it's about this relationship and friendship between this kid and this creature in the woods. And, like, you get a real sense of friendship, but also Toby is kind of using and abusing the creature for his own gains, but he realizes that and tries to make up for it. It's really, really complex storytelling that's very depressing, and oh my gosh, it goes places. It goes places, and it doesn't skimp on the horror, but the horror is so sporadic, it almost isn't a horror book. It's really hard to explain. It's a horrible life book, let me tell you that. So yeah, I had a good time with it, but it was really random because I was not ever expecting to have that big of an impact from a book that I thought was going to just kind of be relatively run-of-the-mill. Next up, another book that was a complete surprise is a book called The Emperor of Anson, which was a Dragonlance novel. And this is focusing on a specific villain in the Dragonlance series, talking about how this villain came to prominence and like how they kind of like made the choices to become the Emperor of Anson. And I had never read any of the Dragonlance books, so I went in this completely blind. So I did not know this character beforehand. I don't even really know the story of Dragonlance. I loved this book. I thought this was a really interesting character study on showcasing how somebody grows into becoming a villain. It's almost, how there's like the hero's journey. This is the villain's journey. And it's really, really well done. And the writing is really kind of compelling because you really kind of follow this character, and like there are bits of him that are very human and very understandable, but there are a lot of villainous aspects of him because he's a villain. Wow. So this actually prompted me to buy the original Dragonlance trilogy, and I'm also going to be buying and reading the rest of the villain series because I loved it. I thought it was a great novel and just a complete surprise. It truly was a book that I wasn't expecting anything from, and it was a great surprise. Next up, not really a surprise because I knew I would have I knew I loved this series. This is R.A. Salvatore's Homeland, which is the very first Drizzt Do'Urden books. Now, I say first, I mean first chronologically. So a little bit of background. So there is a Icewind Dale trilogy, which starts with the Crystal Shard. Those were the ones that were published first. There are 3 books that were published before this book, and that story was very beloved, so R.A. Salvatore decided to write the origins of Drizzt Do'Urden and figure out how he got to the point that he is in those original trilogy. Any person picking this up from a modern perspective will almost assuredly start at number 1. I decided to go in publication order, and I'm kind of glad I did. Not that it would have been bad to start here, but it just that you can understand some of the importance of some of the decisions Drizzt Do'Urden makes from this story. I really love the Drizzt books because they really kind of make you think about your own upbringing, your own society, because he comes from the Dark Elves in the D&D universe, and like they are like very over-the-top evil. Like, we're talking, like, over-the-top evil. And they do all these, like, very clearly horrible, villainous things. And you kind of understand why and how they get there with their culture in this story because, it's really a cruel upbringing and a lot of boiled-in societal hatred. And Drizzt grows up and he does not fall in that. And he doesn't fall into those same biases and hatreds as the rest of his family. And you find out why he's different and how, like, you can examine some of your own societal prejudices and things that you kind of get pointed at in your own life as being like the ultimate baddies, and kind of try to dissect that and why are we as a culture villainizing these people. And I don't know, I thought that was there's a lot of that that's really interesting to take into account with this series. Now obviously these are very like 90s science fiction books. So like, this is fantasy, not sci-fi, but sci-fi and fantasy are always shelved in the same category. So it's not a perfect book, right? Like there is a lot of, elements that are, imperfect, I would say, and especially if you look at the early depictions of the Dark Elves in D&D art. It's very bad. Like, that's bad. But in the modern parlance, they have gone to being purple. So Dark Elves are purple now. And you can see, if you look at the evolution of the covers of this book specifically, you get to the point where you're like, they're purple now. We don't do that anymore. They're purple. The Dark Elves are purple. And you're like, okay, it makes the whole thing a little bit more palatable because it's very questionable with their original color scheme. That's all I'll say. But this book was fantastic, and I loved it, and I'm really excited to read more in the series. Another series that I kind of hopped in from this little vlog was the third story in the Gaunt's Ghost trilogy. Well, sorry, it's not a trilogy. There's a bajillion of them. I believe there's 16. So this is Necropolis. So I have read a few Gaunt's Ghost books. So what I did is I read the first one, First and Only, and then I read the second one. I don't remember what the second one was called. I did like it. And then I read a book that was published way in the future, but was set between that book and this book, which is called The Vinicula Insurgency, because it's set very early in the timeline of this long-running series, and I was really as an interquel. So then I read that, and then I hopped into this. I really liked this. I thought it was really interesting, and it really gets to the heart of why I enjoy Warhammer stories, because it really goes into the societal injustices and the lies, and a lot of times when you read a war story, you're reading a war story that is, especially if it's whether it's nonfiction or if it's a fictional tale that's set in the real world, there is a lot of aha, our country is the good guy. If you read most American war fiction, they don't really get into the horrors and the badness and all the truly monstrous things that are done by the U.S. military. They almost always kind of go, yada, 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 they defeat the bad guy, and now we're all, it's 4th of July. And with stories like this, the Gaunt's Ghost ones, is the Imperium is terrible. The Imperium is an awful place to live, and is an awful society to live in, and this is a story that recognizes that. It also recognizes that some of the things that are used as propaganda in war are not anything like they seem. There's a character who is positioned as being the hero of a particular battle and a particular offensive, and he is not. He is a very bad man who survived only because he did terrible things. And it really kind of shows that dichotomy. You also get a little bit more of Gaunt being a kind of a bastard himself a little bit. They don't go full into that, but he is still he's a commissar, and what are commissars? Well, they're originally from, I believe they're from a Russian military background is where they got the character, but basically what they are is they are there to be oh, you're gonna run from this offensive, you get shot. Oh, you're not gonna listen to this, you get shot. And Gaunt is a nicer commissar, but he's still a commissar, and he still does some nasty, bad things in this book as well, which I thought was good, because it makes the whole kind of conflict way more interesting if there's a more realistic depiction of what war is and how war is very, very bad. The only thing I wish I would have got more with this is a bit more perspective from the villains. You don't really get villain perspectives, and I kind of noticed that in a lot of Abnett's work. He chooses a side to present the story from and doesn't go into that other side as much. But it's still really good and really compelling, and I really enjoyed it. Next up, a book I fucking hated. Friday the 13th, Hell Lake. This is, somebody wrote I'm not even joking. Somebody wrote a fan fiction where Richard Ramirez, he's changed. The name is slightly changed, but it's so obviously Richard Ramirez that you're oh. And it's Richard Ramirez becomes best friends with Jason in hell, and then Jason and Ramirez, they get out of hell by just rampaging up through all the levels and getting out into the worlds. And this is so badly written. There's a lot of like very like iffy bits, and like they get into like Jason is just wow. The writing in Jason, like the way Jason is written in this book is like astronomically bad. And because it's like it's very much somebody who's very interested in true crime, and they try to take all these weird true crime elements to put it on Jason to try and dissect his like mental headscape, when you're like, no, he's kind of just like a force of nature, and like the things that he does, that like it's bad. It's also bad because the writing is just god awfully terrible. Jason shoots a guy at one point, which is wild. Jason gets shot in the literal butthole. I'm not joking. The character literally shoots Jason in the butthole, and you're like, okay, that's a thing. That's a choice that somebody made. Yeah, no, it's bad. It's bad. I'm very glad I was not one of the poor suckers paying like $100 for this pile of shit. Oh, one of the worst books I've ever read. Going back into the Warhammer state of things is The Big Daka by Mike Brooks. Was one of my most anticipated reads of the year. I was so glad I got the hardcover. It is so pretty. It's the prettiest book I own. And it's just this big old caked up, beefed up orc. And he's very pretty. And it's this orc. It's basically orcs versus Drukhari. And so the Drukhari are like the quote-unquote dark elves of Warhammer, but they don't have the same bad connotations that old classic D&D dark elves do. They're just kind of like, this is what like evil elves are like in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And they are very much like kind of like torture demons, where they have to like torture people and like use their suffering to prolong their own existence. And like the orcs are just like, oh, they mash them and smash them and crunch them up. And it's so fun because it's very much one of the true strengths of Mike Brooks's orc books is that he really puts two always very interesting sides and contrast them with each other. Because like before we had like the orcs versus the Adeptus Mechanicus in Brutal Cunning, and that is basically a book about the snobs versus the slobs. And like this book is very much like the orcs are just about having a good time and partying, and just destruction and war is a blast to them, and they're just loving life. Whereas the Drukhari are all about like misery and like trying to like take all of the enjoyment out of another's existence in order to prolong their own dour, miserable lives. And Mike Brooks does a really great job of like dissecting what it would actually be like to be a Drukhari, which I thought was really great. There's this amazing enemies to lovers bit where like two Drukhari clearly love each other, but their society is like, no love, you're only doing this to screw over the other person. So like the Drukhari is like, they're just like, yes, we are going to get married, but because we hate each other and we're gonna completely totally start backstabbing each other as soon as we get married, because that's what society thinks is good for us. And it's like, but like they clearly actually love each other, and it's amazing. It's so good because like their culture is like not built around that, so it's like it's so funny. There is a lot of like, so like the Grots, who are like kind of like the goblins in Warhammer, they kind of like are doing a rebellion against the orcs, and like they have like all these very funny discussions that are like taking like, if you think about like, Communist Manifesto, where it's like seize the means of production, where like in this one, like the goblins are like, oh, we're gonna steal all their bullets and stuff, so we're gonna seize the means of destruction. And I was like, hey, that's just funny. I just thought it was very funny, and it was such a blast to read, and all the orc characters are so well done, and like there's so many awesome freaking battle sequences in this that I love. There's like one of the main orc has like this teleporting hammer, and he but like it doesn't work very well, so like every time he like tries to get it teleported back, it ends up somewhere completely random. Like this one time when he activates it and like it like comes inside of the dude who's like behind him, and the orc behind him just explodes, and he picks up his hammer and he's like, well, at least it came back to me. And it's just all kinds of very silly things like that, where the Drukhari are very like serious, like this is how it is as a Drukhari. Anyways, I loved it. Then I got onto my vampire bullshit, haha, and I read some classic vampire literature, The Vampier by John Polidori. I never read this before. This is one of the other stories that was bought at, was brought to life at the Villa Diodati, which is the same place that, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came from. So one of the very first early vampire stories came from the same night as the very much more famous Frankenstein story. And this was a blast. I really like this. It's not overly complex in what it's trying to say, but I think that I had a good time with it. And it's very much focused on a specific character going through their own lives. And yeah, no, I just thought it was a cool, interesting story. And like the characters that we're following are actually pretty interesting. And it's very funny because our main character just never learns his lesson and gets caught again and again and again. And you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. Another one that's a very famous story is Carmilla by J. Sheridan LeFanu, which I actually really, really enjoyed until the last few pages. Like, I feel like the last maybe 20 pages of this, it was just like, God, they just over-explain everything. And it's just like, no. They just ruin all their, like, cool mystery weirdness. And they just, like, explain it all. And you're like, come on. I just want to see these two ladies want to make out. I don't want to read all this other stuff. Like, at the end of this book, they just, like, go to this freaking graveyard, and then some guy comes and just, like, tells them this whole different story, and then some other dude shows up and is like, haha, this is why she's a vampire. And I'm like, bitch, I don't care. I like these two characters interacting. That's cool. Give me more of them. I only want to see them. I don't care about this other stuff. Anyways, it's still good, and it's still classic, and it's very important. But, like, it's not as gay as I was hoping. So, rude. Then I read Nightclub by Mark Millar, which was a freaking vampire story that was awful, and I don't want to talk about it. It's a vampire comic series that sucked, and not in the good way. A good vampire comic I read is Blade. I read the first volume of, I believe this is the latest Blade Marvel series, and it was very fun. It's just Blade doing Blade stuff, and I love the character of Blade, and I had a good time with this. He's kind of trying to stop a apocalypse that he inadvertently helped begin, and it's just a bunch of really awesome artwork, some fun character stuff, and some awesome action sequences. So I had a great time with this one. Another one I had a great time with was Live Girls by Ray Garton. This was so fun. This was just like a classic little sexy little vampire tale set in the old frickin' Times Square. Oh, how I wish I could have visited that sleazy mecca. It is this amazing depiction of what Times Square used to be, which was the sleaziest place to exist maybe on the planet. And then they gentrified it and took down all the fun stuff. That's not really what this story is about because it's set during the time period where it was still rocking and a-rolling. But this is just like, there's a bunch of sex workers who are vampires, and it's like, good for them. They're cool. I like them. And there's like this guy, this hapless guy who gets kind of trapped in with these after his girlfriend breaks up with him, and he's just kind of slowly becoming more and more obsessed with this one particular vampire lady, and all of the chaos that ensues. And yeah, there's a lot of really cool horror bits in this, some great action sequences, and some just cool characters. I actually really liked all of the characters in this one. Next up is a Vampire the Masquerade story I read. This was a collection of novellas called Walk Among Us, and one of those was actually done by Cassandra Khaw. There's also one by Genevieve Gornichek and Caitlin Starling. So these were 3 novellas. I quite enjoyed all of them. I quite enjoyed all of the novellas. I think the first novella is the one that I like the most, but I did enjoy them all. The first novella just really gets talking about characters with anxiety in a way that I thought was really, really good and really compelling and well done. And I like that book story even though it ends with one of my least favorite tropes. So I thought that was amazing that it managed to surpass my sheer hatred of this one particular trope and still told a good story. But the other 2 are also great. So this is a really fun collection of vampire tales. Even if you don't know anything about Vampire the Masquerade, I think these are easy to just kind of hop in and you kind of like learn a little bit about the universe as you go and kind of... this is things that I read this specifically because I'm planning on doing a Vampire the Masquerade game in the future. Will it be on YouTube? Who knows? When will it be? Who knows? But it's in the future. Yeah, so I enjoyed this quite a bit. And then I read Billy Martin's Lost Souls. And I really wished I liked this one. I think I have specific triggers that kind of made this book not work for me. It's just like, I feel like this is a book that had I read when I was in my teens, I wouldn't have had a problem with the issues that occur in this book. Because, like, I feel like this is written for people who are, like, very young and don't think of all of the, you know, the intricacies and horrors of some of the stuff that happens in this story. And, like, it just didn't work for me as well as other Billy Martin works have. The story was written very cool. Like, it had, like, a good writing style. And as always, the descriptions are beautiful. But I hated Steve. There's a character named Steve, and I hate him. I hate Steve with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns. And he is one of the main characters, and I hate him. Ghost is actually the only character I really, really liked, because, like, even the frickin' vampies are, like, child predators, and I'm like, these poor children, save them from these shitty vampires. They're assholes. I hate them. I hate them all. And, like, there's not really any comeuppance with all that stuff. And I like, there's, like, once they get to New Orleans, there are some interesting elements of different types of vampires, and I thought that story was, like, really cool. But, like, there's a lot of incest in this book, and I'm like, you know, no thank you. No thank you. I love the other Billy Martin books that I've read, so I'm kind of the outlier with this one, and I love vampire tales, but I did not like this one. Next, I read Eclipse. And I loved Eclipse because I have weird tastes. It's been a while since I read Eclipse, which is the 3rd book in the Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer. I do think that this is probably my least favorite of the 4 books. But I still enjoy it. It does have, like, a lot, and I mean a lot, of the very silly things that Stephanie Meyer just does, which is to, like, set up a very compelling story and then just not tell you what happens. Like, there is, like, a beat where you're, like, setting up a character's, like, backstory when they got dramatic revenge on all of their enemies, and Stephanie Meyer just yada yada. She doesn't want to talk about it. And you're like, girl, I respect you, but that sounded really cool. Can I hear about it? And it's like, nah, you can't hear about it. And Jacob is so bad in this book. I hate Jacob in this book. Almost hate him as much as Steve, but not quite. Not quite. The end battle is pretty cool, and I do like some of the werewolf action in this one as well. So I still had a good time with it. It's just there's like a few things that I was just like, ugh, and then there's other things where I'm like, please tell me more, and you just don't learn more about it. Which is, like, again, endemic of just that. Stephanie Meyer's not interested in that, and that's fair. It's just like you get like a nugget of something that you're like, let me read about how she got revenge on all these dudes, and it's like, nah. Rosalie's just gonna yada yada that. I'm like, all right, girl. All right. Another Warhammer book, because I guess I have a problem. I read too many of these. This is Lord of Excess by Rich McCormack. And this is all about the Emperor's children. And this is another book that, kind of like Dweller, is I thought was going to just be one thing, where it's just going to be like them versus Gene Stealers. So Gene Stealers are kind of like the aliens from Alien, and like they are almost an entire legion of chaos worshipping Cenobites, essentially. So I thought it was going to be interesting about like them trying to get pleasure out of like beings that like they're like a hive mind, so they don't feel pain, they don't feel all of the excess of emotions that they feed off of. And I thought it was just going to be that, but this is actually kind of like a more giant story all about the rule of a single planet over I think it might be 30 years, and how they fail at what they're trying to enact. And I really liked it. I think I was just kind of hoping for something else. So this wasn't quite at the level of the other books that I read, but I still loved the descriptions. I love whenever you get an idea of how the Emperor's children view the world when they're like on all of these crazy psychotropic drugs, and like how that affects how they experience time. And I love Noise Marines, who are like basically just like rock and rollers, but like they scream death at you. And you just basically explode because they just scream at you and go. Yeah, and it was great because there was all this infighting of the Legion, and there's also some steps made to explain how the hell they would even function as a military unit, because they're all depraved people who have their very specific obsessions, and it's like, how do any of them like manage to exist as a team? And they actually get into that really well. So yeah, I had a great time with this. I just was, I guess, expecting something a little bit more smaller. So when it got into a larger context, I was kind of like, oh, interesting. So this one might be an interesting one to reread in a few years to see if my opinions change. Then I read Camp Slasher. Now, I've never really heard anyone talk about this, and I had a great time with it. I was pretty much pro Camp Slasher. This is like a really fun little slasher novel with some good characters, some gross sequences, some wild kills. And this is a book that kind of takes a little while to get going. It's like all of these teens. They are kind of trying to bring back this old decrepit camp back up and running for people to come and camp there in the future. And the bulk of the story is kind of getting to know all these characters and these kids and like kind of actually care about them. So when the wild slashing bits happen, you care and you're kind of surprised because you're like, damn, I thought that was a main character. I thought that was a main character. Ba-bam! And then like when it really gets going, it gets going. Like there's some wild sequences near the end of this book. And yeah, it's gross. There's some gross stuff in this, but I enjoyed it. Then I read Final Slaughter by Sergio Gomez, and I love Camp Slaughter, and I love Halloween Slaughter. Halloween Slaughter is still my favorite slasher book of all time. Final Slaughter is still very, very good. I liked it not as much as Halloween, but probably at the same level as Camp Slaughter. I think it kind of came down to what characters are being focused upon in this book. Because you get a lot of stuff with characters who are returning from Camp Slaughter, and those characters didn't make as much of an impression on me as the characters from Halloween Slaughter. Not that there was many characters from Halloween Slaughter to return. And this is definitely a final Slaughter. Now, it would be very funny if there was one more book after this. I don't know how you would do it because this one's pretty final in its conclusion, but almost every slasher series, when they say final, there's always usually one more movie or another few. So I would be interested to see if like Sergio Gomez releases another book, like a fourth book, a surprise book. I don't know how, but weirder things have happened. There's some wild kills in this one though. Like this one has some like bam kills, and I was like, damn. The slashing bits are so good, and there's like some really good characters in this. So I had a good time with this. But yeah, not as good as Halloween Slaughter, but that's kind of an impossible bar to leap over in my opinion. Then I read I'm in Love with Moth Man, which was one of Kelsey's favorite reads, and that's actually a audiobook that I got gifted by, say it with me, Loomis, Kelsey. I don't actually know if you can see Loomis. This will be awkward if you can't see Loomis, but if you can, he had no reaction, so I guess it's awkward either way. So yeah, I'm in Love with Moth Man. It's got some monster romance, but like it's like a slow burn. They don't bang until like very far into the book. It's mostly about them like, getting to know each other, falling in love. And it's actually kind of like a sweet story. Mothman, he's kind of a winner. Especially compared to everyone else in this freaking place. Oh my god. Well, not everyone else. There's just the other boys. All the other men who are not Moth specifically suck. And Mothman is very much a fun character. And yeah, I had a good time with this. Like, it's a very fun, well done, good romance monster smut D-book. I don't know if I would call it monster smut. This one, I guess, would be monster romance with a little bit of smut, eh? You don't care. Next up, another book that was just fucking amazing is Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze. Holy shit, was this good. I loved Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle, and this book was just as good, if not just as good. I love Camp Damascus too. I don't know which one I like more. I'd have to read both again. Oh no, I'm going to have to read two of the best books I've ever read again. This one is amazing. I love this book because it is very much focused on something that I fucking hate right now, which is how AI is going to ruin everything. And yeah, it's really, really well done. It was not what I expected. I think the less you know going in, the better. I don't want to talk too much about this plot because it was a really fun thing to experience, but this is a horror tale with a very specific point to it. I think the horror elements are done exceptionally well. It's very funny in parts. I was not expecting where this book goes, and I had a wonderful time with it. And Chuck Tingle has such a great way with building characters that really feel three-dimensional and feel like real people. So a really high recommend for this book. Next up, the final Warhammer book, I swear. This is Corax, the Lord of Shadows. I love Corvus Corax, who is the Primarch of the Raven God. Could you tell? His name is Corvus. And his books are called, like, Nevermore and shit. You're like, yeah, we get it. He's the Raven Guard. We get it. I love him, though. He's very much like a goth boy. He's like a sad, depressed goth boy. But he's also like a giant, and he could just like tear you apart with no issues. He's a strong goth boy, which is like the scariest of all goth boys. You know? They're scary, Loomis. Goth boys be scary. They can be. What do you think? He thought it was pretty good. And I agree. I thought this was good. I thought it did well with exploring the character and really kind of getting into his faults as a leader. And I quite enjoyed it. But it's hard to get into this too much if you're not invested in this series already, which, looking by the numbers of my Warhammer videos, none of you are. Oh my goodness, another book that rocks is The Maleficent 7 by Cameron Johnston. It's a book that I read near the end, and holy shit, this might be another 6-star book. This might be another book that's like one of my favorite books of all time. It is so unbelievably good. It is basically like Seven Samurai or the Magnificent Seven, where there are a series of seven people who are trying to protect a town from outside forces. But this time, the seven people trying to protect this town are some of the worst pieces of shit you've ever met. And it's like all of these people that would normally be villains in various fantasy series, all getting together to try and defend this town to do one last good thing. And it's so good because it's like, these guys are bastards, and then the force that's opposing them is also bastards. It's like a kind of a postmodern fantasy story because it addresses how fucking horrible most quote-unquote hero factions of fantasy are, because like the places that's like coming in to like destroy the town are the bright ones. They're all bright and angelic and use holy flame. And basically it's about the church. It's about a bunch of bastards fighting the church. And it's awesome. It's so good. All of the characters who are like opposed are like, there's so many good characters. Like there's an awesome vampire character who is so cool. There is like a great orc, and it's awesome. And it's like, it goes into all the realities of the horrors of war, the horrors of like, they're trying to protect this town, but this town also has a lot of issues because it's a medieval town, right? Like it's not all good either. There are issues in the town, and like it's so good because it gives humanity to the monstrous without letting them off the hook for being horrible monsters. So yeah, love this. I cannot wait to read more Cameron Johnston stories because this was show my shit. Then I read Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. It's a weird one. This is a weird one. But it's fucking effective. I didn't know what was going on for half of this book. I was really trying to figure out where the story was going, what kind of story I was trying to tell. And when it goes there, it goes there. And it shouldn't be as effective as it is because it's not, like, I've read some, like, twisted, horrible things. But for some reason, like, the way that the things that happen in this story are told is, like, it stuck with me more than objectively more wild, horrible things in other things. It's like, it's interesting. It's like very much all about like the imperfection of art made by the young, and it's really cool. It's good. It's impactful. It's another one that I don't really want to tell people too much about because I would like to talk about it if you've read it, but it's just a strange book. It's a strange book because a lot of it should not work for me, but it really, really does. So, let's just say that. And last, but certainly not least, was Venom, the Lethal Protector. This is the novel version of the, I guess it's the literal novelization of a comic book series from the 90s. What's interesting is it tells that story, but obviously it goes into a little bit more of the characters' internal monologues and how they think and how they act, and there's just enough meat in terms of character interactions to get you into the story, and the action is really well presented, and it's a ton of fun. It's very interesting because it's like, it kind of gives you a glimpse of 90s stories filtered through a modern lens, because like characters have like smartphones now, and like it's very much told from a modern perspective, but like the characters are all very much in their 90s like their 90s personas. Like they're clearly characters from the 90s, but it's being filtered through a modern lens. I don't know. I thought it worked. I thought it was like a really good novelization, really fun action sequences, and was really well done. So yeah, this is a great month for me for reading. Will next month be even better? Let me know about your faves, and have a day that is good. Bye bye.